to you, O Christ. This week I was driving down the road and I saw off in the distance a chain link fence, and on that fence were what appeared to be large vinyl banners, and on each of those banners was a photograph. From the distance I was at, it looked like they were probably pictures of people on the football team. My guess in this day would be that they were the seniors on the football team and that each of these banners represented one of those players. Last year, my nephew graduated, and when he was a senior as a wrestler, they had a big banner for him. We have a friend who's got a son that is a senior this year, and as he wrapped up cross-country season, they had a big banner with his picture on it. It's a way of celebrating these seniors. It is a way of cheering them along in what they are doing. It's a way of tying together the identity of the team with the identity of the whole of the school. And a reminder that we all need a cheerleader sometimes. As I remember back sports, and even now as I have a kid in band, right? When the team gathers, right, the band comes and brings some energy and some enthusiasm, and then the cheerleaders come and lead the cheering, and the parents cheer, and there's this whole function around our sporting things where we cheer people on. But in this time of pandemic, that has been challenged and it's been more difficult. So sometimes those cheerleaders aren't there. Sometimes the band not there. We've had to limit the number of spectators and parents that can be there to cheer our people along. And sometimes we just need a cheerleader. As we hear Paul write to the Thessalonians today, I think he knows that they need a cheerleader. He starts off in kind of a tougher place by saying, listen, you don't need me to write to you about the times and the seasons. I think what Paul is saying is, you all know what it's like out there. We live in the Roman Empire. You see the soldiers. You see the impact of that oppressive regime on our communities every day. I don't need to tell you about that, is what Paul is saying. But then he shifts gears, and it seems like he's giving them some stuff to do. He tells them not to get overly focused on peace and security, because as soon as you say we've got that accomplished, it gets destroyed. Because the peace was the peace of the empire, and the peace of the empire was enforced with military might, right? And so I'm reminded of a time when I used to work for a bunch of years in the libraries at the middle and elementary schools where my children went, and I would go in and bring order to the bookshelves. And as soon as I had it all ordered, a kid would come in and take a book and mess it all back up. And that's what they're there for. Like, I didn't begrudge them that, right? The order was to equip them to get those books. But what Paul is saying is, just like that order that I created was fragile, when all we do is search after peace and security, it ends up being fragile. So he's telling them, don't do that. Instead, be alert, stay awake, stay sober. And this is how we live in these times and seasons that are challenging. For us today, we get this same word from Paul. I don't have to tell you about the times and the seasons. We know all of the struggles that are around us in the world. And we certainly have plenty of evidence of our search for peace and security, whether that's in the alarms on our cars and our houses, the gates or the walls around our communities, the military might, the guns, all of the stuff that we use to try to keep ourselves safe and secure. We need a certain amount of safety as human beings, but I think what Paul is saying is when we only focus on that safety and security, we end up finding out that it's fragile and it disappoints us, and that puts us into a tough place. This week, I had an exchange with someone who knows well the times and the seasons that are all around us. It was a request for some conversation, and in that request came just a pouring out of a struggle. The pouring out of the struggle began by saying, look, I see everything that's going on. And then said, and it's made me mad and angry, right? Just watching the news. And that anger has led to hate. And that hate then, right? This anger and hate has become this constant thing that gets refueled because of the times and the seasons. It's caused the person to lose sleep. They've tried to go out and fix it, right? To take long walks and to think differently and to try to have a different heart about the whole of the thing. And that hasn't worked. And so now, that hatred of others has turned into a bit of a self-hatred, right? This is not who I am. It's not who I've been. I was always so grateful and generous and joyful, and now I've become angry and hateful, and all the way to the point that I just don't even like who I am anymore. This is a tough place to be, and it's in response to the times and the seasons. And if we pay attention to Paul, he gives us a lay of the land as to how we sometimes respond to these things. Now, this person that I was having this conversation with could easily have done what Paul tells us not to do. He says, don't get drunk. And I think he literally means that sometimes when we have deep pain, especially if it's a personal pain about ourselves, and when that pain is connected to the pain of the world, sometimes it's just so tempting to turn to drugs or to alcohol or gambling or pornography or just scrolling through our phones or streaming Netflix end on end day after day. All of those are ways that we numb ourselves to that pain that we are feeling and to the pain that is around us that we are connected to in the world. And Paul says, don't do that. He also says, stay awake, right? And while I literally think he's probably talking about being drunk, the staying awake bit doesn't mean stay up 24 hours a day and pay attention to God. It means that sometimes our solution when we have that pain, that personal struggle that's connected to the world, that it's easy to just kind of throw our hands up and want to get disconnected and deny that that's a problem and just keep going along and not worry about it. We can become apathetic, we can become complacent and live in that place where we just don't want to see the reality that is right around us. And Paul's saying, no, don't do that either, right? Don't be drunk, don't just be complacent, don't live in those places. And he doesn't unpack all of the why, but he knows that it's not healthy for us to live in spaces like that. And so he's inviting us into a different way. And it sounds like he's inviting us into a different way of doing, right? Stay sober, stay awake. And then he says, right, share your faith and your love and your hope, and then build one another up. Be cheerleaders for each other. But if we think that Paul is encouraging us to a different way of doing, we miss something really key that he's saying in this passage, which kind of comes toward the end. He said, whether we are awake or asleep, right? He recognizes that we will fail. The person that I was having this exchange with didn't need something to do, right? Doing had failed. Doing had not solved the problem. The hatred and the anger was still there. What it really was an identity crisis. And what Paul is writing to the Thessalonians is about identity. He's not talking about what they do, but about who they are. He is coming along to cheer them and to be their best cheerleader, to send them out into the world in a different way. Not because they're going to be great at doing it a different way, but because they're grounded in a different place of identity. He could have hung up a banner with a picture of the Thessalonians that said, children of light. He tells them, you are children of light. This is an identity statement. It's not a to-do. He tells them, you belong to the day. You don't belong to failure. You don't belong to the empire. You don't belong to hate. You don't belong to anger. You belong to the day. You are children of light. You belong to the day. That could be the second banner that he hangs up. The third thing that he tells them is, you are destined to salvation in Jesus Christ. You are children of light. You belong to the day. You're destined to salvation. This isn't something you have to earn or do. It's who you are. And he grounds that whole being in Jesus. He says, listen, Jesus died. Jesus was raised, right? This is what Jesus did to reconcile us with God. On the cross, he meets us in all of our denial, all of our complacency, all of our apathy, all of our numbness, all of that Jesus meets on the cross, and then makes this new thing, this new life that we are gifted to live. What Paul is doing is cheering them along to say, this is who you are. It's not what you do. It's not what you earn. It's who you already are because Jesus made it that way. You are children of light. You belong to the day. You are destined for salvation. Then he gets to the part where he says, whether we're awake or asleep, it's a recognition that the things that we do fail. I remember when I was a high school wrestler, the cheerleaders would sit right next to the mat and they would pound on the mat and they would cheer, and they had all kinds of different cheers that they did. And as I was wrestling, I lost way more matches than I won. So when they were sitting there chanting stuff like, you're going to beat them, I would be on the mat getting badly beaten, right? Like this wasn't, it was an optimistic cheering that they were doing, but it was a wonderful support, right? They were there to cheer me on, whether I was succeeding or failing, no matter which way. They were right there cheering. And this is, I think, what Paul is inviting us to do for one another. Building one another up, he says. inviting us to be cheerleaders for one another, but not any kind of building up, right? It's this building up of an identity that we are children of light. We belong to the day. We are destined for salvation. He then tells us how to go out into the world with that, to put on the breastplate of faith and love and to put on the helmet of hope. These are very intentional images that Paul chooses as he tells them that peace and security are going to fail. These are images of the Roman army, right? They had their breastplates and their helmets. And what he's saying is that we go out into the world not with weapons and armor, but with hearts full of faith and love and with heads full of hope. And when we take hearts full of faith and love and heads full of hope and we cheer one another along, we come out into the world in a whole different way. Yes, we can look around us and see that the times and the seasons are terrible. Yes, this person reached out to me was in a place of identity crisis when it comes to faith. But that crisis has now been grounded in this gift of grace and love. And the person can now go out into the world, and it's not easy to take our faith and our love and our hope. But it is what Jesus equips us and calls us to do. I would love to be able to assume that every single one of us has had a great cheerleader in our lives. I've had several. I know some of you probably haven't had somebody that you could call your best cheerleader. And that is part of the brokenness that we have as people. And part of what I think Paul is inviting us to do is to be each other's best cheerleaders, to remind each other that we are children of the light, that we belong to the day, that we are destined for salvation, that we can be whole and well. But then we become the cheerleaders for the world. Imagine with all of the seasons and times, the way things are now with the division and the anger and the hate, right? We can contribute to that. But imagine if we came out as cheerleaders, finding people and reminding them that they are beloved, reminding them that they are children of light, reminding them that God has claimed them, that they belong to the day, reminding them that they are destined for salvation, not because of what they think or do or who they are, but because Jesus made it so. And if we can be the world's best cheerleaders, if we can do that, then absolutely I can imagine that Jesus' grace and love will pour through us and shape the world around us so that the times and seasons might be a little bit different. They'll always be probably a little bit rough. The people are people and the brokenness is around us, but we can bring a measure of grace and love to that, being the best cheerleaders that Jesus has invited us and created us to be. Amen.